Human thought the bid was for scrap. Then a beautiful alien girl appeared. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. David Turner stood at the back of the auction hall, his posture stiff and uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. He had never belonged in places like this. High-end auctions where wealthy elites gathered to bid on objects of rare beauty and unimaginable value. But here he was, a simple janitor, hired to clean up after the event. He had learned early in life that the best way to survive was to stay invisible and out of the way. That's exactly what he intended to do. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the low murmur of conversation. As David pushed his mop across the floor, his eyes occasionally flicked up to the raised podium where the auctioneer enthusiastically presented the items. He didn't care about the paintings, the jewels, or the exotic artifacts. It was all just stuff to him. But then something caught his attention. A moment of silence swept through the room as the auctioneer introduced the next item. David's gaze lifted, and for a brief second, he thought his ears had betrayed him. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have something truly unique. The auctioneer's voice rang out, filled with excitement. A living being, one of a kind. A rare specimen from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. An alien from the planet Zorith. David blinked, not sure if he was hearing correctly. His mind struggled to process the words. A living being? The crowd gasped in surprise, and whispers of excitement spread like wildfire. The auctioneer continued, her status as royalty, her rare genetics. David's heart skipped a beat. The curtains were drawn back, revealing what appeared to be a young woman with striking features. Her skin was a shade of pale blue, almost glowing under the soft lights, and her silver hair cascaded down her back in waves. Her eyes were an arresting shade of violet, filled with a deep, unreadable emotion. She stood still, her arms bound by invisible restraints, as though the very air around her was forcing her into a perfect pose. The crowd was mesmerized by her beauty, but David saw something different in her eyes. It was not the look of a captured princess, but the gaze of someone trapped in an unimaginable situation. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a pull, an urge to do something, to help her. David turned his attention back to the auctioneer, who was now listing off the expected bids, his voice growing increasingly eager. Starting bid. David's mind was racing, but he couldn't focus on the numbers. The alien girl's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the entire room had disappeared. The auctioneer's voice faded into the background, and David was lost in the depth of those violet eyes. The realization hit him like a slap. The bid wasn't for scrap. It was for her. David had never imagined he would find himself in this kind of situation, staring at a beautiful alien, who, against all odds, seemed to be staring back at him as though she had somehow known he would be there. As the auction continued around him, David felt the weight of the moment sink in. He couldn't let this happen. He had no idea how, but he knew he had to act. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his hand raised. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, glancing at him. The crowd fell silent. 100,000 credits, David blurted out, his voice cutting through the tension. The room went still as the auctioneer's eyes widened in disbelief. Excuse me, the auctioneer said, clearly shocked. David felt his heart pound in his chest. He didn't have 100,000 credits. He barely had enough for rent this month. But something inside him had snapped. He wasn't going to stand by and watch this woman be sold like property. She deserved more than that. The alien girl's eyes locked onto his again, her expression unreadable. David took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. 100,000 credits, he repeated, this time with more conviction. The auctioneer hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. Sold, he declared, his voice booming through the room. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. David couldn't believe what he had just done. He had bought her. And in that moment, he had no idea what came next, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. David's heart was still racing as the auctioneer slammed the gavel down, declaring the alien girl his. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief, but all David could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat thumping in his ears. He had just done something unimaginable. He had bought a living being, a person, not an object. His fingers trembled as he wiped the sweat from his palms, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The alien girl, still standing motionless in the spotlight, now seemed even more fragile to him. Her violet eyes locked onto his again, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of emotion in them. It wasn't fear, nor was it gratitude, just an undeniable sense of recognition, as if she knew he was different from the others who had come before him. The auctioneer moved toward him, his voice dripping with a businesslike tone. "Your payment, sir," he said, extending a data pad for David to sign. David quickly scanned the document, his mind still reeling from the shock of it all. Without hesitating, he transferred the required amount of credits to the auction house, though he knew the funds had come from a loan. His decision had been impulsive, driven by something deep inside him that he couldn't quite explain. As the transaction was completed, the auctioneer gestured toward the girl. "She is now yours," he said with a sense of finality. David felt his chest tighten. This was real. He had done it. The girl was now in his care. "What's your name?" he asked softly, stepping closer to her. She didn't answer immediately, as if unsure whether she was allowed to speak. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "Zara." Her voice was like a melody, a soft, musical sound that caught David off guard. "Zara," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Zara didn't respond, but her eyes softened, just a little. David wasn't sure what to do next. He had bought her out of a feeling of moral obligation, but now that he was standing here with her, the reality of the situation was setting in. He wasn't prepared for what came next. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. He turned and began walking toward the exit, but Zara didn't move. For a moment, she stood there, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she followed him. As they walked out of the auction hall, David couldn't help but feel the weight of the stares that followed them. He was a human, nothing special, but she was an alien princess, someone who had been treated as a commodity. The world around them didn't seem to care about that, though. All they saw was the transaction, the exchange of money for a living, breathing being. David's mind raced as they reached the exit. He had no idea where to take her, what to do next, but the one thing he was sure of was that he couldn't leave her in this situation. Zara was still silent beside him, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar world outside. David glanced over at her, his heart heavy. "Are you okay?" he asked. For the first time, she spoke. "I've never been okay," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of suffering. David swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to help you, but I promise I'll try." Zara looked at him, her expression still guarded, but there was something in her eyes, something that made David believe she wanted to trust him, even if she didn't know how. As they made their way through the crowd, David could sense the change in the atmosphere. The looks they received were no longer just curious but filled with judgment. He didn't care. Zara was his responsibility now, and he would protect her, no matter what. They reached his car, a modest vehicle compared to the luxury of the auction hall. As he opened the door for her, Zara hesitated for a moment before slipping inside. David followed her, shutting the door behind him. The engine roared to life, and they were off, leaving the auction house behind. For the first time in a long time, David felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know where this road would lead them, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone use Zara again. Not as a pawn, not as a prize. She was a person, and she deserved more than what the world had given her. David drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound in the car. Zara sat beside him, her eyes staring out the window, watching the world she didn't belong to. The streets of the city seemed mundane, far removed from the glittering high society she had been part of just hours before. He glanced at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. The tension in the air was palpable. Neither of them knew what to say, but David couldn't help but feel the weight of her presence next to him. She had been sold like an object, a trophy. Yet here she was, beside him, her fate now in his hands. He couldn't quite understand it. What did it mean to be her protector? And what did she expect from him? He didn't have answers, but the questions kept circling in his mind. After a few minutes, Zara finally spoke. "Where are we going?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere you don't have to worry about being sold or used again." Zara didn't respond, but he could feel her eyes on him now. He glanced at her again. She was still silent, her lips pressed together in a way that suggested she was trying to hold something back. David felt a pang of guilt. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing. He wasn't equipped for this kind of responsibility. He wasn't trained to be anyone's protector. He was just a guy trying to survive, trying to make ends meet. But something about Zara's presence made him want to do more. It made him want to fight for her, even though he wasn't sure how. They drove for a while longer before David pulled into a quiet neighborhood. It was far from the chaos of the city center, a place where people lived simple lives, tucked away from the pressures of the elite. He parked in front of a modest house, the kind of home he'd always dreamed of but never really believed he would own. It wasn't much, but it was his. "This is where I live," David said as he turned off the engine. He glanced at Zara. "It's not much, but it's safe. You can stay here." Zara looked at the house with a skeptical expression, but she didn't say anything. Slowly, she opened the car door and stepped out. David got out as well, his feet landing on the pavement with a soft thud. "Come on, I'll show you around," he said. Zara followed him to the front door, her steps hesitant. As they entered the house, David felt a strange sense of unease settle in. This was his world, a place where he could control everything, where he didn't have to worry about the outside world. But with Zara here, it felt like that control was slipping away. He didn't know how to help her, how to make things right. He wasn't even sure if he could. Zara looked around the small living room, her gaze moving from the worn furniture to the kitchen in the corner. It was a humble place, nothing extravagant. "This is where I sleep," David said awkwardly, pointing to the couch. "There's a spare room upstairs if you want it." Zara nodded, but her eyes never fully left the room. It was clear she was still processing everything. "I'll sleep on the couch," she said after a long pause. David didn't push the issue. He simply nodded and moved toward the kitchen. "I'll make us something to eat," he offered, trying to break the tension. Zara didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice was softer. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she had spoken with any kind of warmth since they had left the auction house. David felt a small sense of relief. Maybe this wouldn't be so hard after all. As he prepared a simple meal, Zara sat at the small table, her hands folded in her lap. He couldn't help but glance at her every now and then, wondering what was going through her mind. What did she expect from him? And what did she think of him? Was he just another person who would let her down, like everyone else had? The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there. David set the food on the table and sat down across from her. For the first time since meeting her, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A mixture of gratitude and sadness, perhaps. She was still a mystery to him, but David was beginning to understand that it would take time to unravel it. "You're safe here," he said quietly, breaking the silence. Zara looked up at him, her expression softening just a little. "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply ate, the quiet comfort of their shared meal bridging the gap between them. David couldn't help but think that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. The world was complicated, and he didn't have all the answers. But at least for now, he had Zara, and that was something worth fighting for. Days passed slowly in David's modest home. He did his best to create a sense of normalcy, though Zara remained an enigma to him. Every day, she spent her time exploring the small house, her violet eyes scanning every corner, as though she was trying to make sense of her new reality. There were moments when their silence felt comfortable, and other times when it felt like an impenetrable wall between them. David found himself wondering if she was simply biding her time, waiting for the moment when she could escape or return to her people. Yet, something in her eyes, something soft and vulnerable, told him that she wasn't as detached as she appeared. One morning, David came downstairs to find Zara sitting by the window, staring out at the garden. The early light cast a golden hue over her silver hair, and for a moment, she looked almost at peace. He hesitated at the foot of the stairs, unsure whether to interrupt her thoughts or let her have her quiet moment. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong here," she said, without turning to face him. David swallowed hard. unsure how to respond. He had no answers for her, no way of telling her that everything would be okay. He wasn't sure what okay even looked like anymore. "You belong here as long as you need to," he said softly, finally making his way over to the kitchen. He busied himself with making coffee, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Zara. What did she expect from him? What did she expect from anyone? She had been a queen, a ruler of sorts, with responsibilities far beyond anything David could imagine. Now, she was here, with him, and the world outside felt distant, like a dream that no longer mattered. Zara didn't answer him, but she did eventually move away from the window. She came to the kitchen, sitting at the table as David poured coffee. The silence between them wasn't as heavy today, and that gave David a small sense of hope. "Thank you for everything," Zara said, breaking the silence again. Her voice was steady now, though there was still a hint of sadness in her words. David stopped mid-pour, glancing at her. "I didn't do anything," he said quickly, setting the coffee pot down. "You're safe here." She nodded, but he could tell that her gratitude wasn't just for safety. It was for something deeper, something unspoken. "No," she said, her gaze meeting his. "You've done more than just give me shelter. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, hope." The words hit David harder than he expected. He hadn't thought of it that way. He hadn't realized that his simple act of kindness, taking her in, giving her a place to stay, could mean so much. It wasn't much, but it was everything to her. A part of David wanted to ask her what she planned to do, where she wanted to go, but he knew that was something she had to figure out for herself. She was still processing everything, still adjusting to the life she had been thrust into. "I'm just trying to do what's right," David said finally, returning to his task of making coffee. Zara watched him silently, and for the first time since she had arrived, David felt a shift between them. It wasn't a dramatic change, but something subtle, something that told him they were slowly becoming something more than just a stranger and a lost alien. As the days went on, Zara began to open up more, bit by bit. She shared stories of her home planet, of her people, and of her life before everything changed. It wasn't easy for her to talk about, but David could see that it helped. She needed to remember who she was, to find a piece of herself that had been buried under the weight of her captivity. The more Zara spoke, the more David realized just how much she had lost. Her people were gone. Her status as a queen was meaningless now, and her past life felt like a distant memory. But there was a fire in her, a strength that David had noticed from the first moment he met her. Despite everything, she still had that spark. And that spark was what kept her going. One evening, as David was preparing dinner, Zara walked into the kitchen with a small smile on her face. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice calm. "Maybe I should try to find a way back. Maybe I should go back to my people, try to restore my place." David stopped what he was doing and turned to face her, studying her expression. It wasn't the first time she had brought up the idea of leaving, but this time, there was something different in her tone. It wasn't desperation, it was determination. "You're not alone anymore," David said quietly, his voice firm. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to." Zara looked at him, her expression softening. "I know," she whispered, "but I have to figure out who I am now. I have to find out what my place is in this world. I can't just hide away forever." David nodded. He understood. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, offering a small smile. "You're not alone in this." For the first time since meeting her, Zara smiled back. It wasn't a smile full of joy, but it was a smile nonetheless. And for David, that was enough. The weeks that followed were a mix of routine and moments of discovery. David had managed to create a comfortable existence for both himself and Zara, though it was clear that Zara was still struggling with her new life. She would spend hours in the garden, lost in thought, and David often found himself wondering if she was thinking about her home planet, her people, or the life she had left behind. It was impossible to know what went on in her mind. One afternoon, as David was cleaning up after lunch, Zara came into the kitchen, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. "I've been thinking again," she said quietly, catching David's attention. He paused, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "About what?" he asked. Zara looked down at her hands, fiddling with the edges of her sleeve. "About my future," she said. "I know I can't stay here forever. You've given me so much already, but I have to find my own path, figure out who I am now that everything has changed." David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had known from the beginning that her stay with him was never meant to be permanent. I understand, he said softly. But you don't have to rush. You can take your time. You've been through a lot. Zara's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was something in her gaze, something unspoken. I've never had a chance to make my own choices before, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything was decided for me. My life, my future, it was all laid out. But now, I get to choose. I get to decide what happens next. There was a sense of determination in her voice, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of the powerful woman she must have once been. The queen she had been, the ruler she had been born to be. But that world was gone now, and this new life, with David, was hers to shape. Whatever you decide, David said, his voice steady, I'll support you. Zara smiled, though it was small, fragile. Thank you, she said. I don't know what I would have done without you. The weight of her gratitude settled in David's chest, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she wasn't telling him. Something deeper, something that only she understood. As the days passed, Zara started to spend more time exploring the local area. She would walk through the nearby park, visit the small shops, and even began to talk to the people in the town. It was slow progress, but David could see that she was starting to rebuild herself. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky, Zara turned to David. I've made a decision, she said, her voice calm but resolute. David looked at her, waiting for her to continue. I'm going to leave, she said, and for a moment, David's heart skipped a beat. Leave? He repeated, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Zara nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars. I have to find out who I really am. I can't stay here forever. I need to understand my place in this world. I need to find my people, or at least make peace with who I've become. David felt a wave of sadness wash over him, but he understood. Zara needed to do this. She needed to find her own way, to reclaim her identity, even if it meant leaving everything behind. I get it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But just know, wherever you go, you'll always have a place here. Zara turned to him, her eyes softening. I know, she whispered. Thank you, David, for everything. The next morning, Zara packed a small bag, her movements deliberate. David helped her gather everything she might need, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this goodbye was inevitable. It wasn't a sudden decision, but it felt sudden to him. He hadn't expected this moment to come so soon, but he also knew that Zara's journey was her own. I'll never forget you, Zara said, her voice quiet as she stood by the door, ready to leave. David smiled, though it was bittersweet. You don't have to. You're part of my story now. With one last look, Zara stepped outside. David watched her go, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of hope for her. He knew she would find her way. The world had changed for both of them, and now, it was time for them to move on. But as he stood in the doorway, watching her disappear into the distance, he couldn't help but feel that, in some way, they had both found something they hadn't expected, peace, in their own way. Days passed after Zara left, and David found himself adjusting to life without her presence. The house felt quieter, emptier, though he tried not to dwell on it. He had known all along that Zara's journey was something she had to face alone, but a part of him still missed her. The way her soft voice would break the silence, the way she had seemed so determined to rebuild herself after everything she had lost. David kept himself busy, going to work, cleaning up the house, but there were moments when he would stop and think of her. How was she doing? Had she found her people, or was she still lost in this vast universe? He had no way of knowing. But life went on, as it always did. Weeks turned into months, and David's routine slowly became his comfort. It was a strange kind of peace, a peace that was marred by the lingering thought of Zara. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had left something unfinished, something important. One evening, as David sat on the porch watching the sunset, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. His heart skipped a beat, but when he looked up, his eyes widened in disbelief. Standing at the edge of the driveway was Zara. She was different. There was something in her posture, something more confident, more sure of herself. Zara? David asked, rising from his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara smiled. A genuine smile this time, one that reached her eyes. I found something, she said, her voice steady. Not what I expected, but something important. David didn't know what to say. He just stood there, his heart pounding in his chest as Zara approached. "I've realized something, David," she continued. "I'm not who I was before. I can't go back to the life I had, and I don't need to. I'm creating something new. For the first time in my life, I'm living for myself." There was a sense of peace in her words, a sense of finality that David hadn't expected. He had always wondered if Zara would try to return to her past, to the life of royalty and power she had once known. But now, standing before him, she was no longer that person. She had found her own path, one that didn't rely on her past or her people. "I'm proud of you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think you would come back. I didn't think I'd see you again." Zara took a step closer, her eyes softening. "I didn't know if I'd come back either," she admitted. "But I realized I had to. I needed to thank you for everything you did for me. You gave me a chance when no one else did." David's heart swelled with something he couldn't quite explain. He had helped her, yes, but he hadn't expected anything in return. He had never expected her to come back. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "I just did what I thought was right." Zara nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "You did more than that. You showed me that I have worth, that I'm not just a pawn in someone else's game." David smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "You always had worth, Zara. You just needed to see it for yourself." They stood there for a long moment, the sun setting behind them, casting a warm glow over the scene. For the first time in a long while, David felt at peace. Zara had found her way, and in doing so, she had given him something he hadn't expected, a sense of closure, a sense that things were going to be okay. Zara had made her choice. And now, David could finally let go. "I don't know what comes next," Zara said, breaking the silence. "But I know I want to face it with you. If you'll have me." David didn't hesitate. "I'd like that," he said, his voice steady. And in that moment, as they stood there together, David realized that the world wasn't as big and scary as it had once seemed. There was still hope, still a chance for both of them to find happiness, even in the face of uncertainty. Together, they could figure out what came next. And that, David thought, was enough. It had been a few weeks since Zara had returned to David's life, and things had settled into a new kind of routine. Though the quiet moments still felt foreign, there was a calmness that had settled between them. They had started to build something of their own, a new chapter in both of their lives. David continued with his daily work, but now, after hours, Zara would join him in the evenings. They would sit outside on the porch, talking about everything and nothing at all, or take walks around the neighborhood, the simple act of spending time together becoming more precious with each passing day. Zara, for her part, had started to look at the world through a new lens. She wasn't the same person who had walked into David's home months ago, a royal alien princess caught in the turmoil of a life she couldn't control. No, now she was Zara, a woman who had chosen her own path, and who was slowly rediscovering her strength, her identity. She had even begun helping David with little things around the house, cooking meals, and tending to the small garden in the back. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Zara looked at David with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she began, her voice a little more confident than it had been when she first arrived, "I've been thinking about what you said, about me finding my place. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, but I know it's here, in this world, and not in the past." David smiled, glad to hear the conviction in her voice. "I think you're right," he said, his voice steady. "You've already come so far, Zara. Whatever you choose to do next, I know you'll do it on your terms." Zara nodded, her gaze shifting to the window, where the last traces of daylight were fading. "I've been offered an opportunity," she said, her voice a little more tentative now. David leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of opportunity?" Zara hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I've been in contact with a group of people, others from my world. They've reached out, asking me to join them. They're rebuilding what was lost, and they think I can help. It's a way to reconnect with the past, but it's also a chance to help shape the future in a way that's not bound by the old ways." David sat back, absorbing her words. He had known this day would come, the day when Zara would face the possibility of returning to her roots, of reclaiming the identity she had once held. But there was something different in her tone now, something that made him realize she wasn't looking for a return to power. She was looking for a way forward, for something that allowed her to keep her own agency, her own autonomy. "That sounds like a big decision," David said quietly. Zara met his eyes, her expression firm, yet vulnerable. It is. But I think it's the right one. I'm not the same person I was, David. I've changed. And I want to be part of something that will allow me to make a difference. Not just for me, but for others too. David felt a mix of emotions swirl in his chest. There was a part of him that didn't want to let her go, a part that feared what life would be like without her presence in his daily routine. But at the same time, he knew this was something Zara had to do. It wasn't about him. It was about her. You should do it, David said, his voice steady, though his heart ached. If it's something you believe in, then you should go. Zara smiled, a soft but genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'm glad you understand, she said. I wasn't sure if I could leave here and still feel like I was leaving with your blessing. David's heart lifted at her words. You'll always have a place here, Zara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No matter what happens next. The two of them sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. It wasn't easy, and David wasn't sure how to feel about it. But in the end, he knew it was the right choice for Zara. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, not about the future or the uncertainty it brought, but about the simple things, the kind of things that grounded them both. And as they did, David realized something important. Zara had given him something, too. She had given him the chance to open his heart to someone again, to see that there was more to life than just surviving. No matter where she went, Zara had changed him, and for that, he would be forever grateful. The days that followed were filled with quiet anticipation, and David found himself adjusting to the idea of Zara leaving. He had given her his blessing, but part of him still felt a deep ache, knowing that she was about to step into a world that was so far removed from the small, peaceful life they had built together. The morning she left, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Zara had packed only the essentials, leaving behind the things she had accumulated during her stay, as if she was ready to start fresh, to embrace the unknown. David helped her with her bag, and for a moment, they just stood there at the door, unsure of what to say. I'm not sure what comes next, Zara said, her voice soft, her eyes meeting his. But I know I can handle it. I've come so far already, and I'm not turning back. David nodded, though his heart felt heavy. I believe in you, he said, the words more genuine than he expected. You've proven that you can face anything. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness, as if she knew that this goodbye was inevitable. I'll miss you, David, Zara said, her voice quiet. You've been more than just a protector to me. You've been my guide, my friend. And I'll always carry that with me. David swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. I'll miss you too, Zara. I hope you find what you're looking for. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who had shared something significant, something real. Zara turned toward the door, her hand on the handle, and paused for a moment. She glanced back at David, her eyes softening. I won't forget you, she said, her voice steady. No matter where I go, I'll always remember what you did for me. You gave me a chance when I didn't think I had one. With that, she opened the door and stepped outside, disappearing into the world beyond. David watched her go, his heart heavy with a mix of emotions. He didn't know what the future held for Zara, or for him, but he knew one thing for sure. Their lives had changed because of each other. He stood in the doorway for a long time after she left, the world outside feeling different, somehow quieter. He had given her the freedom to find her own path, and in doing so, he had found a piece of himself that he hadn't even realized was missing. As the days passed, David kept himself busy, but he couldn't shake the feeling of loss. It wasn't that he regretted helping Zara. He never would. It was just that, without her, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. One evening, as David sat in the quiet of his living room, his phone rang. He picked it up, unsure of who it could be. When he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was Zara. He answered quickly, almost too eagerly. Zara, he said, his voice betraying the surprise he felt. David, she said, her voice warm but tinged with something else, something he couldn't quite place. I just wanted to call and say thank you again. I've made it to the group, and things are looking up. I found my place, David. I think this is where I'm meant to be. David smiled, relief flooding through him. I'm glad, Zara. I always knew you'd find your way. She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I wanted to say something else, she said. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that, no matter where I go, I'll always be grateful for what you did for me. You gave me a second chance. And for that, I will never forget you. David's heart swelled with emotion, and for a moment, all he could do was listen to her words, letting them sink in. I'll always be here if you need me, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. No matter what, you've got a friend in me. Zara's laughter, light and genuine, came through the phone, and for the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of peace. Thank you, David, she said softly. Take care of yourself. I'll always remember you. With that, the line went quiet, and David sat back, his heart full. He didn't know what the future would hold for Zara or for him, but in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, they would both be okay. Months passed, and the quiet rhythm of David's life gradually returned to a semblance of normality. He had kept busy, taking on extra hours at work and spending time fixing up the house. Despite the emptiness that lingered, he had learned to fill the silence with routine. But Zara's absence was never far from his thoughts. The small changes in his life, the new sense of purpose he had gained, were all because of her. Still, he often found himself wondering about her. Where was she now? What had she become? He had never expected to hear from her again, not after the way she had left, determined to start over. But life, as it turned out, had a way of surprising him. One late afternoon, as David sat on the porch, the familiar hum of his phone broke the stillness. He glanced down at the screen, surprised to see Zara's name. His heart skipped a beat. He answered immediately. Zara, he said, his voice betraying the surprise and relief he felt. David, she said, her voice as calm as ever, but with a warmth that made his chest tighten. I wanted to check in. I've been meaning to reach out, but things got so busy. I understand, David said, his voice steady, though he could feel the anticipation rising in him. How have you been? There was a pause on the other end of the line before Zara responded. I'm good. I'm finally starting to feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. I've made a place for myself, surrounded by people who understand me, who don't just see me as a symbol or a commodity. Her words brought a wave of relief over David. He could hear the confidence in her voice, the strength that had always been there, but was now fully realized. I'm glad to hear that, David said softly. You deserve it, Zara. You've worked hard to get here. Zara was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice held a note of vulnerability. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything. What you did for me, David, it changed my life. You gave me a chance when no one else did. David's heart swelled with emotion, but he kept his voice steady. You didn't need anyone else to give you a chance, Zara. You've always had it in you to make a difference. I just gave you a little space to find it. There was another pause before Zara spoke again, and when she did, her words were slow, as if she was carefully choosing them. David, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I'll never forget what you did for me. You made me believe in myself again. David felt a lump form in his throat, but he fought to keep his emotions in check. You don't need to thank me, he said quietly. You were always capable of doing this on your own. I just helped you realize it. Zara let out a soft laugh, the sound carrying through the phone. I'm not sure I would have ever believed that if you hadn't shown me. But now I know, and that's enough. David leaned back in his chair, looking out at the horizon. The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've done more than I could have ever hoped for. I couldn't have done it without you, Zara replied softly. But I think I'm ready to face whatever comes next. With or without you, I found the strength to move forward. David didn't know what the future held for either of them, but he knew that Zara had found herself, and in that, she had given him something he never expected, hope. Hope that things could change, that people could change, and that even the most unexpected connections could make a difference. As the conversation continued, David realized that Zara wasn't just a part of his past. She had shaped the future for both of them. Take care of yourself, Zara, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You've got this. You too, David. And thank you for everything. The call ended, and David sat in the stillness of the evening, feeling a sense of closure, of peace, knowing that Zara had found her way. She was no longer the lost, confused alien he had met all those months ago. She was Zara, a woman who had rediscovered her purpose, and for that, David would always be grateful.